There are moments in history when the noise of the world becomes deafening. Screens flash red. Headlines announce historic crashes. The words crisis, recession, collapse repeat until they pierce the mind. And in the middle of that whirlwind, the human heart experiences an ancient and visceral sensation: fear. It is not merely the fear of losing money. It is the fear of losing security, of losing stability, of losing control. In this context, it is surprising to rediscover a spiritual correspondence in which Padre Pio addresses, with unexpected depth, the anguish provoked by scarcity and economic instability. He did not write financial treatises. He did not analyze markets or propose investment strategies. What he offered was something infinitely more radical: a mystical model for remaining at peace when everything seems to crumble. And that model begins with a statement that disrupts modern logic. The only currency that never devalues is trust in divine providence. To understand the force of this idea, one must situate oneself in the context in which he lived. Padre Pio endured world wars, famines, devastating inflation, and profound social crises. The families who came to him did not speak of economic theories. They spoke of bread, of debts, of children without work, of ruined businesses. The fear was concrete, the scarcity real. Yet in his letters, the center of gravity was never money. It was the soul. In one of those spiritual letters, he wrote that the soul which builds its tranquility solely upon passing goods will inevitably suffer when those goods begin to waver, not because money is evil, but because the human heart tends to absolutize whatever provides it with a sense of control. When that support fails, the entire identity seems to collapse. Here, the core of the mystical model emerges. The problem is not the market's fall, but absolute dependence on the market. Financial anxiety has a root deeper than the lack of resources. It is born of the fear of being left unprotected. When the numbers fall, the soul asks, in silence, "And now, who will sustain me?" Padre Pio answered with firm conviction, "You are not alone. You never have been." For him, the reality of guardian angels was not a pious metaphor. It was a concrete and operative presence. He taught that every person is accompanied by a celestial guardian who participates actively in their journey, not only in physical dangers, but also in interior battles. Economic anxiety, from this perspective, is not merely a psychological phenomenon. It is a spiritual combat. When the mind begins to anticipate catastrophe's total ruin, irreversible loss, a bleak future, a mechanism is activated that feeds panic. Catastrophic thinking becomes an interior prophecy. The person begins to live today, the suffering of a tomorrow that does not yet exist. Padre Pio proposed interrupting that cycle through a conscious act, turning to the guardian angel, not as escapism, not as superstition, but as an exercise of faith. He said that the angel has the mission of illuminating the mind when it is darkened by fear. Before making impulsive decisions, before being swept away by despair, he recommended raising a simple prayer: "Angel of God, help me to see clearly." This gesture changes the interior dynamic, because anxiety does not only alter the emotions, it distorts judgment. Under extreme pressure, the human being tends to act from impulse, not from prudence. Padre Pio's mystical model insists on first restoring interior peace so that subsequent external decisions may be more serene. In a letter addressed to a man anguished by the ruin of his business, he wrote something disconcerting: "Do not allow worry about tomorrow to rob the grace of the present." With this phrase, he pointed out that prolonged anguish does not solve the economic problem, but it does erode the spiritual life. Providence in his teaching is not an abstract theory. It is a living reality. It means that God does not abandon his children even when circumstances become adverse. It means that human history, with its cycles of prosperity and fall, is inscribed in a greater plan that surpasses immediate logic. The mystical model for tranquility rests on several fundamental pillars. The first is the acceptance of fragility. Markets can fall. Jobs can be lost. Investments can diminish. Denying this possibility generates illusion. Accepting it with serenity generates strength. Acceptance is not passive resignation, but lucidity. The second pillar is active trust. Padre Pio never promoted irresponsibility or negligence. Working, planning, saving, being prudent, all of this is legitimate, but turning the outcome into an idol is dangerous. Act with diligence, he implied, but do not set your heart on what can disappear. The third pillar is the conscious relationship with the guardian angel. This aspect profoundly distinguishes his approach. Before important decisions, he recommended invoking celestial assistance, not because the angel replaces human intelligence, but because it helps to purify motivations and calm the mind. Financial anxiety often carries a component of isolation. The person feels alone in the face of the threat. The recognition of a constant spiritual presence breaks that solitude. When the soul understands that it does not face the storm in isolation, the intensity of fear diminishes. But the model goes even further. Padre Pio saw crises as moments of purification. This may sound harsh, but it contains a profound truth. When everything works, the heart tends to lean on the visible. When the visible wavers, the soul discovers where its trust truly rested. In times of abundance, many deposit their security in bank accounts, investments, or properties. When those structures weaken, the uncomfortable question arises: what was my hope resting on? The crisis reveals hidden idolatries. Yet this revelation is not condemnation. It is opportunity. Financial anxiety can be transformed into a trial of faith. It can become an occasion to reorder priorities, to remember that the value of a person is not measured in figures. Divine providence, from this perspective, functions as a parallel economy. While the world calculates in percentages and fluctuations, heaven operates in grace. And grace does not devalue. It does not depend on indexes. It does not lose purchasing power over time. When the soul anchors itself in this truth, something extraordinary occurs. Material loss no longer equates to existential catastrophe. Pain may remain, worry may arise, but despair weakens. Padre Pio insisted that interior peace is an immense capital. Whoever preserves serenity can discern better, decide better, wait better. Paradoxically, this spiritual stability also improves the capacity to face the economic crisis in a prudent manner. Constant anguish, on the other hand, clouds reason. It drives precipitous decisions. It destroys relationships. It erodes health. That is why he affirmed that persistent fear is incompatible with filial trust. Not because God demands serenity as a condition, but because trust allows one to experience a peace that has already been offered. Transforming anxiety into faith does not mean denying the numbers. It means denying them absolute power. In the midst of market collapse, the soul can pronounce an interior act. I trust that my life does not depend solely on these figures. This act does not eliminate the difficulty, but it changes the posture of the heart. History demonstrates that no economic structure is eternal. Empires have fallen. Currencies have disappeared. Financial systems have collapsed and been rebuilt. Yet faith has traversed the centuries with a surprising stability. Padre Pio understood that the greatest danger was not material poverty, but the spiritual poverty born of constant fear. Providence does not guarantee wealth, but it does guarantee companionship. It does not promise the absence of trials, but it does promise presence in the midst of them. In this mystical model, the intercession of the guardian angel becomes an anchor. When the mind begins to imagine total ruin, the believer can pause and say, "Angel of God, sustain my mind. Order my thoughts." This simple gesture introduces a pause into the interior storm. And that pause can change everything, because often the exterior collapse is lesser than the interior collapse. The soul that disintegrates under fear suffers more than one that loses goods but preserves peace. Divine providence is the only currency that does not devalue, because its value does not depend on the human market. It is eternal. It is stable. It is immutable. When the heart invests in that currency, it experiences a different kind of security, not based on accumulation, but on trust. This is not spiritual romanticism. It is a radical reconfiguration of priorities. It means recognizing that money is an instrument, not a foundation. That economic stability is desirable, but not absolute. That human value does not trade on the stock exchange. In times of scarcity, This perspective is profoundly liberating. Padre Pio's mystical model does not eliminate human effort. It invites one to work with responsibility, but without idolatry, to plan with prudence, but without obsession, to save with wisdom, but without turning savings into salvation. Ultimately, the tranquility it proposes is born of a certainty. My life is sustained by something greater than the markets. When this conviction takes root, anxiety loses its dominion. The economic crisis may continue. The figures may fluctuate, but the soul remains firm. And then one understands the deep meaning of that affirmation. Divine providence is the only currency that never devalues. Because while everything else changes, God remains. While the charts rise and fall, His faithfulness is constant. While the world trades on stock exchanges, heaven offers a stability that depends neither on interest rates nor on inflation. Perhaps the true question in times of collapse is not how much we have lost, but where our trust was deposited. If the heart learns to anchor itself in supernatural intercession, if it learns to dialogue with its guardian angel, if it learns to transform fear into an act of faith, then even scarcity can become a school of hope. And that hope is a treasure that no market can destroy.